Shehan Jeyarajah, CBS Sports, joins us on 365 Sports. Always great to have him. Tuesdays, most every Tuesday at 4. You've had a little fun today on Twitter, haven't you, with this John Mateer story?
Well, it's kind of right in my wheelhouse, right? It's local DFW kid for me. It's obviously what's happening up in Oklahoma. But the other thing too, just with all of this, is that I think that this is one of those stories that blows up that also just isn't that big a deal, right? Like I think that ultimately, I mean, we've talked to people over at, U.S. Integrity. There's not reason to believe that he's been super involved with gambling or that there's anything really implicating him. So this is one of those things that I think makes a kid sweat, but probably won't end up being that big a deal.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what they can prove, right? I mean, other than, what's going on. But it is stress that Oklahoma doesn't need right now as they're trying to rebound the entire program. And in August, Craig brought it up. He gave him Rhett Bomar PTSD.
No, 100%. And like, it's such an important year for this program, right? And I will say too, like, John Mateer's never been in remotely any kind of trouble, right? Like, he's never like done anything wrong. And one thing that I was talking about with a colleague is just, I want people to remember, he grew up in Little Elm outside of Frisco, didn't play at a good high school program, went to Washington State. That was his only FBS offer, and didn't start until they obviously weren't a power conference team anymore. So like, when you say that he's never had this kind of spotlight on him, this is truly the first time he's ever had that kind of spotlight on him. And when you see him, quickly react and make sure to lock his Venmo payments and all this sort of stuff, right? Like, this is somebody who hasn't been in this situation before. But, ultimately, I think that Oklahoma probably is not going to pursue anything. I don't think the NCAA is going to think that there's enough evidence to open up a case. But like you said, I mean, it's hard not to think about some of these situations like that with Rhett Bomar, where it kind of derails a season and a couple of seasons. This is a time at Oklahoma where they can't afford to derail a season.
Shehan, even if you're up to nothing nefarious or nobody else is, like, just the thought of like, oh, wait, my Venmo payments are public? Did you have one of those reactions like probably thousands of others of like, wait a second, I better go check my privacy settings?
Well, yeah, because I think that mine are probably still public. I did go through and check to make sure because, like, look, for people who don't use Venmo, like, it is very common, especially like when you're in high school or whatever, to put silly captions and stuff. There were some going around with other major college football players that have like, little like sexual innuendos or things like sending money back and forth to their teammates. And so like, this isn't uncommon, right? But it is so funny, the idea that Venmo has a public newsfeed and public payments. I remember there was a bit with John Mulaney where he was like, to us, to me, who's a drug addict, like, that's what this app is for. I don't know what all the rest of you guys are doing on my drug addict app. And, I think that it's one of those funny times where you just kind of look around and you're like, it is kind of weird that I can see all these payments going through. Yeah,
I feel the panic across the country as that people were realizing, wait a second, what do you mean you can see Venmo payments? But the top 25 poll came out for the preseason, Texas #1, and man, I think what struck me was, while they lost so much and yet they're still #1, which is a compliment to Sark, but also kind of a statement on the uncertainty of it all, right? This year, I mean, is that kind of what you sensed as well, of just like, this is anybody's ball game? And I know we kind of say that every year, but this year it really feels like it's true as much as it has been any other year past.
Well, and I put together a piece over at cbssports.com that kind of got into this, because not only, obviously, Texas #1, but this was the closest vote for #1 since 1998, and the closest first place vote since 2008. They were separated by 2 votes. Back in 2008, it was 1 vote. So like, this is kind of unprecedented, especially for this era. We've had this moment of consolidation. And I mean, you look back at really the last 15 years or so, I mean, every single year it feels like there was a team that clearly established themselves, whether it was the reigning national champion, whether it was, frankly, just Nick Saban's Alabama kind of being listed at the top with a lot of the first place votes. And so I do think it's a new era. If you look at things like FanDuel national title odds, this is kind of how it is, right? Like, there's a lot of teams that are between plus 600 and plus 700, at least 4 teams in that range. And if you extend it out to plus 1500, which is still pretty good odds, there are 9 teams in that range. So this is, I think, as open a year as we've had in a while in college football. And even, by the way, when you look at those teams that are at the top, like Texas, well, Texas is replacing their 2 best offensive linemen. They're replacing their quarterback. They're replacing their receivers. They're replacing a couple guys on the D-line. Like, this is not a ready-made national title clear favorite heading into 2025. And if you look down the list at the other 8 teams that I mentioned are in that top group of contenders, every single one of them has some very legitimate questions.
Yeah, I think this is the hardest thing to do now is to project out, because you're not just reloading. You are rebuilding, even if you're a really good team right now, and you don't know how it's going to gel together. Texas's key under Sark was they had all these guys. They didn't really lose anybody. They retained and they added. And so they just kind of added ingredients to building to what they were. Now, maybe that's the same case here with some guys that have come up through the system, but I think you have to let it play out way more now than even in the past, where you could look at a team and be like, look, they're looking at their schedule, looking at what they have, everybody's back. Like, unless something tragic happens, this team's only going to lose 2 games at worst. But now, God in heaven, who knows?
No, and the super conferences piece, I think, are a big part of this as well, right? Because now in the SEC or the Big Ten, you're probably not going 11-1 without breaking a sweat. Now, maybe we'll see a team like Clemson get a chance to do that in the ACC, but in the Big 12, you certainly don't get the opportunity to do that no matter how your schedule falls. And so I think that it makes the sport implicitly in some ways more competitive. I think also, we've talked at length over the offseason about these dynamics of things like the transfer portal and NIL kind of taking the bottom out of some of these really, really elite teams that have stacked talent year over year. And all of a sudden it's well, are you going to be the 73rd man at Georgia, or are you going to be the 4th man at Iowa State? That's a real question that I think that players are having to ask themselves, that's impacting the depth at some of these super elite programs. And so again, I think that it does make the sport more competitive. I mean, even if you want to look at the last couple of years, last year, Ohio State lost 2 games and won the national championship. The year before that, Michigan was an elite team that didn't lose a game, but they weren't the same type of elite offensive talent level of a 2019 LSU or a 2020 Alabama. And so again, I think that the sport has flattened itself out in some ways, and we'll see if it's a long-term trend, but I think that at least for the next year or two, this is what it's going to be like.
Shehan, when the top 25 came out, I thought there would be somebody within the Big 12 at 11 to 13, 14, something like that. Then maybe 2 or 3 stuffed between 20 and 25. That's pretty much the case. And then there would be a handful right outside of that. And that's exactly what happened. What does that say about what the voters still think of the Big 12?
Well, I think the biggest thing that they think about the Big 12 is that they don't have any elite teams. And, I think that there's a legitimate question to be asked about that. I have said all offseason, I do feel like the last 2 years were a little bit unrepresentative of how competitive some of these teams can be at the highest level. I mean, again, you look the last 2 years, there only would have been one team that would have made a 12-team playoff, whether it was, the 4-team or the 12-team in that respective year. Well, that hasn't been the case even when you don't include Texas and Oklahoma over the past decade before that. There have been multiple teams that have gotten into the top 10 conversation, and I expect multiple teams to get into the top 10 conversation in 2025. Now, Arizona State is kind of that rising star in some ways, but many of the other programs that sort of implicitly have credibility haven't necessarily been on that stage. Kansas State is probably the closest thing that the Big 12 has right now, and they're in the top 20. I think if BYU had brought back Jake Retzlaff, they would have been much closer to the top 15. And by the way, the Big 12 only had 4 teams ranked in the top 25. They also had the first 3 teams out in BYU, Utah, and Baylor. So 4 teams in the top 25, but 7 teams in the top 28. So I think there's a lot of teams that are right on the cusp, but this is why Brett Yormark, the Big 12 commissioner, talks about needing brands to establish themselves. They don't want to just be a parity conference forever, because when there is only parity, it's much harder to create greatness.
How important do you think for eyeballs, and it worth the risk of moving one of the best rivalries, although not protected in the scheduling in Farmageddon to Ireland, is next week's game in Ireland for the Big 12, to have a good game between two good teams that are really evenly matched and should be in this race for the entire year.
Well, it's an interesting question, right? Because one, I know that a lot of people did not like that the Big 12 moved some of the rivalry games off of rivalry weekend. They want to kind of be on that stage. I actually think that it's a good thing for the Big 12 to really spread around their rivalries, because one, I think that you think of one like Arizona State, a great one, the Territorial Cup, that I think a lot of people would fall in love with. Well, like, I don't think that you're in that situation when you're lost on the same day as the Iron Bowl in the game, right? So I do like that piece of it. And I think that it's actually really cool that Iowa State and Kansas State are kicking off the season, because these are two teams that, one, should expect to contend for the Big 12, and two, could very much end up in the college football playoff race. And you get them alone on national television in a game that everybody in the country is going to watch. I think some people are going to be surprised with what they see, with the quality of some of the players, with a quarterback like Avery Johnson, with what Iowa State does defensively. And so I think that this is a really good showcase for this conference and this program. I mean, you look at a lot of the, let's say the ACC versions of this games that have been there in previous years. They haven't been meaningful games. They haven't been good games, right? I mean, yeah, it's great that we got to see Georgia Tech versus a bad Florida State, right? But like, it wasn't a game that actually had much meaning. Northwestern against Nebraska a couple years ago, it was two bottom feeder teams. These are two teams that are at the top of their games, two coaches that are at the top of the country. And I think it's going to be a great showcase for the conference.
When the season begins, which is just around the corner with that game, you attend games, cover games. How do you keep up with everything going on throughout the weekend? Is it just you eventually soak everything in, grab this, grab that, print this? How do you do that, Shehan, during the Saturday game days?
Yeah, it's a lot. I'll tell you that much. I think that there's a couple of pieces of this. One, like, it's a process of elimination. So let's say in week one, right, you have the P5 versus P5 games. You have the good G5 games that get with the conference title contenders. You have the top 25 teams. And so you just pay attention to sort of the top group of those. As the season goes along, you really focus on two things: the AP top 25, just to, maybe top 30 as well, right? And conference championship contenders, no matter what conference they're in, right? Because they're going to be teams that ultimately shape the college football playoff picture. So maybe at the beginning of the year, you start with 136. By the time you head into October, maybe you're looking at 50 to 60 week to week, and so on and so forth, until you're down to maybe about 30 teams in the month of November. So you're constantly moving. Now, of course, you still pay attention to everybody. And I said this last year. One of the funny things was that Arizona State was one of the teams that I kind of process of eliminated after they lost to Cincinnati. And so, like, it's never going to be a perfect science. And sometimes you have to go back and rewatch and catch up with teams that maybe you wrote off a little bit too early. But you know what? In a sport this big, sometimes you just have to live with the consequences.
Shehan Jeyarajah with us on 365 Sports. Of the teams in the top 5 or 10, Brett McMurphy had a note with us yesterday about how it's been forever since anybody outside of the top 7 ranked in the preseason poll in the college football era has been able to win the national title. That doesn't surprise me. But if there is somebody this year, who do you think that will be, knowing that Alabama's right outside 7, they're 8, and then you have a few others in the top 10 or 12. Is there anybody that you see that is not among that top group who you see as somebody that is going to make a run at it?
So I do think that the top 8 or 9 this year is pretty set in stone at this point. I think that I would take that group over the field, for example. Alabama, like you mentioned, a team that's not technically in the group, I think belongs as part of the group. And I think LSU as well, who I believe is the number 9 team in the country, is maybe one of the most undervalued national title contenders this year. They really rebuilt their secondary through the transfer portal. They've got, in my opinion, maybe the best quarterback in the country coming back in Garrett Nussmeier. along with a stacked wide receiver group. So, I mean, the big question for them is going to be whether they can rebuild their offensive line after losing a couple of great tackles. But they're a team that I think has been building to this moment. And they, I think, understand with the second-year quarterback what you need to accomplish. And so I think they built a roster that gives them a chance to do so. Once you get past the top 10, though, like I don't see Miami being in that group. Obviously, I think when you start getting down to the Michigans, the South Carolinas, like I just don't know that there's a team that could jump up. So I think that top 9 is just about right.
Do you think that Tennessee got maybe too much of the benefit of the doubt being in the poll at all, given the tragic quarterback situation that happened to them in the spring?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't have personally had them in my top 25. I didn't think that number 24 is egregious by any means. And I think that BYU was number 27. They kind of obviously had a similar situation. So for them to both be in that range felt fair enough to me. Again, I probably wouldn't have had either in my personal top 25, but this was a team last year that was led by their defense and their running back. And both of those factors from that team are gone before you even get to the quarterback. Like they needed Nico Iamaleava to take a step this year to maintain what they did last year, much less build on it as well. So I think that this is a team with a lot of complications. They do have a relatively easy schedule for the SEC, and that's going to give them a chance to at least find their footing. But I really just don't see this team as being a serious contender in the SEC or for a college football playoff spot.
Shehan, thank you, buddy. Appreciate it. Thanks for your time. Every Tuesday at 4 from CBS Sports. Shehan Jeyarajah with us on 365 Sports. Coming up next, former KU running back Brandon McAnderson and the career he had. He's a part of KU radio and also does a pregame show. I think it's a pregame or postgame show or both. He'll join us next. Yep. Yeah, super chat. Oh, we have a super chat. Let's do the super chat before we take the break and come back. From Kim Coulter, tell Shehan to look for the 365 tent in Lubbock. I will text him that. Kim Coulter has our logo, the 365 Sports logo, on a big-time tailgate, which is right there where everybody has to walk by for most part to get inside the stadium up in Lubbock. This is 365 Sports. I was looking at the Don Chimador and Coffee Beans. They're building a new website, and just looking at it, it's not launched yet.